There are moments in life when the weight becomes invisible, but heavier than ever. When strength is no longer loud, no longer celebrated, yet quietly demanded every morning you rise again. This is where resilience is born, not in triumph, but in the choice to endure. This story is about the kind of strength no one applauds. The kind that bends, breaks, heals, and still shows up. It will remind you that failure is not the opposite of purpose, it is often the doorway to it. In a quiet town shaped by iron and ash, where sparks danced like fleeting hopes, there lived a blacksmith who believed strength was forged only through force. He did not yet know that the deepest transformation comes not from striking harder, but from learning when to let the metal rest. This is his journey. And maybe, in some quiet way, it is yours too. Every morning before the town stirred, before the birds tested their voices against the pale sky, the blacksmith was already awake. The forge came alive with him, embers glowing like tired stars, iron breathing softly in the heat. This was where his life made sense. His name was Elias. And to him, strength was not a feeling. It was a routine. He believed discipline was the highest form of devotion. You showed up, you endured, you struck the metal again and again until it obeyed. Pain was simply proof that the work was honest. Rest was a reward, not a necessity. And failure was something that happened to other men. The town knew Elias as dependable. Unbreakable. If something snapped, bent, or shattered, they brought it to him. Plowshares, horseshoes, hinges, broken tools, and sometimes broken hope. He never asked questions. He fixed what was placed in his hands. That, he believed, was purpose. Inside the forge, the rhythm of hammer against anvil felt like prayer. Each strike was measured, controlled, disciplined. The iron glowed red, then white, then surrendered. Elias admired that moment, the surrender. He never noticed how rarely he allowed himself the same mercy. When exhaustion whispered, he ignored it. When loneliness crept in with the evening smoke, he fed the fire instead. Strength meant standing alone. Resilience meant never slowing down. And yet, in the quiet moments, those few seconds between breaths, there was something unsettled in him. A thin crack beneath the iron surface. A fear he could not name. What would remain if his hands ever failed him? If the forge went silent? He pushed the thought away as he always did. There was work to be done. There was iron to shape. There was a man to be. Elias believed life rewarded those who never bent. He did not yet understand that even iron, to become useful, must first be softened by fire. And somewhere beyond the forge walls, unseen and unheard, the first lesson of resilience was already waiting. In the months that followed, Elias's forge became the heartbeat of the town. Word traveled quietly at first, then with certainty. If something mattered, if it carried weight, fed a family, protected a livelihood, it was brought to him. His hands shaped iron with a confidence that felt almost ancestral, as if discipline itself had chosen him as its vessel. Each finished piece carried his signature without a mark. Straight edges. Perfect balance. Tools that lasted longer than promises. The townspeople admired him not just for his skill, but for his constancy. He was always there. Always working. Always strong. With every success, his belief hardened. He rose before dawn and worked past dusk. He skipped meals, dismissed pain, and measured time by the cooling of metal. When his shoulders burned, he welcomed it. When his palms split, he wrapped them tighter. To Elias, struggle was proof of forward motion. This was motivation made visible, effort rewarded by progress. The forge glowed brighter now, fed by reputation and demand. Pride settled into him like warm steel, heavy but reassuring. He told himself this was purpose. That to be needed was the same as being whole. But success has a quiet way of hiding its cost. Elias no longer noticed. The days passing. The seasons changed without ceremony. Invitations went unanswered. Conversations shortened. Silence grew comfortable, then absolute. He believed focus required sacrifice, and sacrifice required solitude. Sometimes, late at night, when the forge finally cooled, he would stare at his hands. They were strong, scarred, reliable. And yet, something about them felt distant, as if they belonged more to the work than to him. Still, he pushed on. Because stopping felt dangerous. Because slowing down felt like weakness. Because discipline, he believed, demanded everything. The town praised his rise. They saw strength. They did not see the quiet imbalance forming beneath it. Iron, when struck too often without rest, grows brittle. And Elias, though admired by all, was being shaped the same way. The breaking point did not arrive with noise. It came quietly, like a hairline fracture no one sees until the blade snaps in half. It was a commission Elias had waited weeks for. A large order. Important. Symbolic. The kind of work that would seal his reputation beyond the town. He treated it like all the others, arrived early, stoked the fire higher than usual, struck the iron with relentless precision. But the metal behaved differently that day. It resisted. It cooled too fast. It cracked where it should have bent. Elias tightened his jaw and struck harder. Again. And again. On the final blow, the iron split down its center with a sound sharper than thunder. The forge fell silent. Smoke drifted upward, thin and accusing. In his hands lay something ruined beyond repair. For the first time in years, Elias stood still. The client never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Disappointment carries its own weight. Word spread as it always does, not cruelly, but efficiently. The unbreakable blacksmith had made a mistake. That night, Elias returned to the forge alone. He reheated the metal, convinced it could still be saved. But each attempt only worsened the damage. The iron refused to obey. And something inside him fractured with it. He began noticing the ache in his arms. The tremor in his grip. The exhaustion that no amount of willpower could silence. His hands, those loyal instruments, felt unfamiliar. Fallible. Failure settled into the forge like cold air. In the days that followed, fewer people came. Some took their work elsewhere. Others hesitated at the door, unsure. The forge that once pulsed with purpose now echoed with absence. Elias replayed the moment endlessly. If he had struck differently. If he had rested. If he had listened. Regret is heavy that way, it convinces you that control was always just one choice away. But what hurt most was not the loss of reputation. It was the loss of certainty. If discipline could fail him, then what was left? If strength could break, then who was he? For the first time, Elias did not know how to move forward. And in that stillness, the forge went dark. Elias refused to believe the silence meant anything. He returned to the forge the very next morning, earlier than ever, as if discipline alone could undo what had happened. He cleaned the anvil until it shone, rebuilt the fire brick by brick, and sharpened every tool with obsessive care. Order, he told himself, would bring control back. The forge roared again, but something in him did not. He worked longer hours, pushing past pain with a stubbornness that bordered on punishment. When his hands shook, he blamed the cold. When his shoulders burned, he called it weakness leaving the body. He told himself this was resilience, endure more, strike harder, prove nothing had changed. But the iron kept betraying him. Small flaws appeared in finished pieces. Lines were slightly off. Balance imperfect. The kind of errors only a craftsman would notice, but Elias noticed every one. Each mistake fed a growing guilt that pressed on his chest like an unspoken accusation. At night, he replayed the failure again and again. He remembered every strike, every second of hesitation. He imagined different outcomes. Better ones. Regret wrapped itself around him, convincing him that if he suffered enough, balance would be restored. He stopped speaking to people. Not out of anger, out of shame. Conversations required explanations, and explanations required acceptance. Elias was not ready for that. The forge became both refuge and prison. He slept beside the embers some nights, waking to smoke and half-dreams of iron breaking in his hands. Food lost its taste. Time blurred. The world narrowed to heat, metal, and self-blame. Letting go felt impossible. Because letting go meant admitting that effort had limits. That discipline alone could not save him. That strength, as he understood it, had failed. So he clung tighter to the past version of himself, the man who never stopped, never bent, never broke. He believed if he held on long enough, that man would return. But iron cannot be forced forever. And neither can a human heart. Denial kept Elias moving, but not forward. And with each passing day, the cost of refusing change grew heavier. One morning, as Elias struck iron with the same relentless force, a soft voice interrupted the rhythm. "Why do you hit it so hard?" He looked up. At the doorway stood an old man, thin but steady, leaning on a worn wooden staff. His eyes were calm, as if he had watched the world bend and break 1,000 times, and learned nothing needed to be forced. "I'm fixing it," Elias replied, tension tightening his voice. The stranger nodded slowly. "You strike the metal like you strike yourself. Tell me, do you listen to it, or do you just force it?" Elias frowned. He had never thought of iron as something that spoke. It yielded, yes. Obeyed, yes. But spoke. That was absurd. The old man smiled faintly. Strength is not only in the hand. Sometimes it is in the pause. Sometimes it is in letting go. Elias's hands trembled, the hammer heavier in his grip. He opened his mouth to argue, but words caught in his throat. No one had ever said such things to him, not in kindness, not in truth. "You think resilience is endurance alone," the man continued. "But iron, when struck endlessly without rest, becomes brittle. And a heart, when it refuses to soften, breaks in ways no hammer can mend." For a moment, silence filled the forge. Only the heat of the fire and the small crackle of embers spoke. Elias wanted to strike again, to prove the old man wrong, to restore order. But something inside him, a small, weary spark, paused. The stranger walked toward the anvil, placing a hand gently on its edge. "Listen. Not to the work you do, but to yourself. Strength is in knowing when to pause, when to yield, when to heal." And in that quiet, the first lesson began to sink in. Elias did not yet understand it fully. But for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of release. The weight of unyielding pride loosened, just enough for hope to whisper. The old man smiled, turned, and walked out, leaving behind nothing but words, and a pause Elias did not yet know how to take. After the old man left, the forge felt different, lighter, almost uncertain. The embers glowed, but Elias no longer wanted to strike them with fury. Instead, he let the heat linger, watched it, breathed it in. For the first time in months, he listened. He started small. At first, it was simply resting a moment between blows. Then, he noticed the sound of the wind through the open doors, the distant laughter of children, the smell of wood and ash blending with iron. Life had continued outside while he had been trapped in relentless strikes, and for the first time, he felt a quiet longing to be part of it again. Elias began to take care of himself. He wrapped his hands gently, drank water steadily, allowed meals to nourish instead of fuel labor. The pain in his arms softened when he accepted it rather than denying it. Sleep returned slowly, bringing dreams instead of nightmares. He returned to the forge with a different approach. Instead of forcing the metal to obey, he observed it, noticed its resistance, its subtle responses, its quiet language. Hammer strikes became measured, intentional, almost conversational. Each piece of iron felt alive beneath his hands, teaching patience, respect, and humility. The townspeople noticed the change. Work was still impeccable, but the energy had shifted. It was calmer, steadier, stronger, not because of relentless effort, but because Elias himself had softened. Some evenings, he even left the forge early, walking through the town, greeting neighbors, feeling the pulse of life outside the walls he had built around himself. Most importantly, he began to forgive himself. Forgive the failure. Forgive the obsession. Forgive the endless striving that had nearly broken him. Healing, he realized, was not an act of force but a slow, steady return to balance. And in this quiet rebirth, Elias felt something he had not in years: peace. Not the loud, proud kind that earns applause, but the deep, invisible kind that roots itself in resilience, in patience, and in understanding that strength is never only about enduring, it is about letting go when needed, so growth can take its place. The forge hummed gently. Iron, tempered by fire and patience, gleamed with quiet purpose. And for the first time, Elias felt that he, too, could temper his own life in the same way. Months passed, and the forge settled into a rhythm that mirrored Elias's own transformation. The heat was no longer oppressive, it was familiar, welcoming, a partner rather than a taskmaster. His hands moved with confidence, yes, but tempered with gentleness, each strike a conversation rather than a command. The town noticed. They spoke less of his skill and more of his presence. People lingered when they delivered work, sharing stories, laughter, even small frustrations. Elias listened. He smiled. The world no longer felt like a weight pressing down, it was a pulse, a rhythm he could follow rather than resist. Elias had become a man who understood the invisible strength of resilience. It was not the power to endure endlessly, nor the pride of flawless craftsmanship. It was the courage to pause, to soften, to admit when he was broken, and still choose to rise. Strength was no longer something he measured by sweat or scar. It lived in patience, in compassion, in the quiet balance between effort and release. The forge itself reflected this change. Tools gleamed, but they carried warmth, life, and attention. Iron bent gracefully, responding to his understanding rather than his insistence. Horseshoes, plowshares, gates, they all bore a subtle elegance born from respect, not force. Elias also returned to the town in ways he had long ignored. He helped neighbors without urgency, spoke with children without distraction, and shared meals with friends he had long neglected. Life, once a series of strikes and sparks, now felt like a gentle rhythm, unfolding in harmony with the world rather than against it. And in this new dawn, Elias understood something profound: resilience is quiet. It is invisible, patient, steady. It does not boast. It does not demand recognition. It exists in the spaces between labor and rest, effort and surrender, loss and healing. As the first light of morning spilled across the forge, Elias stood at the doorway and inhaled deeply. He smiled, not the smile of pride, but of peace. He was strong. Not because he had survived alone, but because he had learned to bend without breaking. Elias's story is no longer just his own. It is a mirror for anyone who has carried the weight of expectation, pride, or relentless effort. It is a reminder that resilience is not always loud. Sometimes, it is invisible, quiet, and steady. Here are the lessons his journey leaves behind. 1. Strength is not always force. True resilience often lies in patience, humility, and the courage to pause. 2. Failure is not the enemy. It is a teacher, guiding you toward growth and understanding. 3. Letting go is part of healing. Holding on to the past can weigh heavier than any task. 4. Discipline is valuable, but balance is essential. Overworking without rest breaks the strongest hands, and hearts. 5. Listening is as important as acting. Whether to the world, the people around you, or your own inner voice. 6. Healing begins quietly. Small steps, gentle habits, and reflection bring change more enduring than force. 7. Compassion strengthens resilience. For yourself and for others, it softens the cracks that pride ignores. 8. Life rewards the flexible heart. Bend when needed, rise when ready, and continue, always continue. Elias learned that strength is not measured by how long you endure, but by how wisely you rise after falling. He learned that courage is not in standing alone, but in knowing when to ask, when to pause, and when to trust the rhythm of life. And as you hear this story, remember, your own forge is waiting. The fires may be hot, the iron may resist, but patience, care, and quiet perseverance will shape your life in ways pride alone cannot. Stand, breathe, and move forward, not with force, but with purpose. Your invisible strength is already within you, waiting to be recognized, nurtured, and set free.